Thank you so much, Niccolo. And it's a great pleasure that Niccolo is the one who is presenting me, because this work is basically his. So I'm presenting his work today. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. I thank you so much for inviting me to this special meeting. And the talks have been outstanding. I've learned so much just in the last day and a half, and I'm looking forward to the next ones as well. And today I'm going to talk about using predictions map to guide theory testing in the search for the neural basis of consciousness, but obviously I'll start with Dave. So I thought about three key milestones in my acquaintance, to use the word, with Dave. The first, of course, is the book. So I remember as a student that I read the book, and later on I also taught it to my own students and was thrilled to see how their eyes kind of shone. That's how we say it? When we discuss these arguments and so on. And so I know it pretty well, although today I'm going to talk mostly about the introduction, which means that it is rich enough to also host some follow-up discussion. Next up was when I was a PhD student before my postdoc. Dave gave a talk in Tel Aviv, and later on we had dinner, and I remember that for some reason they had me sit next to him, and I was terrified to sit next to the great Dave Chalmers, and I didn't even know that it's Dave. I said David. And I didn't speak much because I was so stressed, but what I remember very distinctively that he was extremely kind and respectful and treated me as if I'm an equal, although clearly I wasn't. And this is something that has lasted with me, and also when I speak with other people who are younger than me, I try to take that model and adopt it. Later on was Cogitate, what Lucia presented before, and Dave was modest before when he said that he helped a little bit at the beginning and then a little bit at the end, because he, at the very beginning, when we started looking at the different outcomes and what would happen in the experiment, he found a flaw. And all us neuroscientists said, well, we have a philosopher, what does he understand about the experiment? It took us about a month or two to realize he was spot on. And I think that's a very important lesson. And as a metaphor today, this morning we were walking here, and Claudia and I were led very confidently by Dave through the park, through the constructions, and until we got here and even crossed the road illegally. But I thought it was a pretty nice metaphor for how also in science and philosophy he finds the obstacles and he just highlights them for all of us to see. So that was very nice. Another thing before I start, I was looking at your map of the science of consciousness, and I was kind of shocked because my talk is going to be about what happens like the topic that ruled in the 2000s, when I was still a student with admittedly not the best taste in clothes. And the thing that my lab does the most is conscious versus unconscious processes, which is in the 80s. Then I looked like that. So this talk is going to be also a part of the past and not only looking forward. I'm going to talk about theories of consciousness and the way we can test them. And first I want to ask why this question is even important. Why are we spending so much time and energy and money testing theories? So one is because of the puzzle, obviously. So we want to solve this problem, and we think that theories of consciousness might be a good way to do it. And for many years, in the 90s especially, we thought that looking for the neural correlates of consciousness might be the way to go. But as Lucia nicely argued together with Alex Lepovre, we've seen that this agenda was indeed productive, and it yielded a lot of findings, but it also didn't get us to where we wanted to be, hence the famous bet, which is finding the neural correlates of consciousness. And one of the things that Alex and Lucia suggested in this paper was that maybe theory testing would get us closer to solving this problem. But it's not only a matter of theoretical curiosity and understanding what consciousness is, it would also have practical implications. And in a paper together with Axel, who's here, and Anil, who's going to speak next, we try to understand what would be the consequences had the study of consciousness succeeded in reaching its goals, and we were able to understand what consciousness is and how it works. And there are some interesting implications. One relates to questions of life and death, and who and what is conscious. So in this work, together with Nicolo and Mirto Milopoulos and Aaron Sugar, we try to take theories of consciousness and extract the implications those theories would have about the lack of consciousness, the potential and capacity and existence of consciousness, and also to highlight where these theories fall short in our attempt to do so. Another work that was also mentioned this morning by Tobias used theories of consciousness as an inspiration or as a roadmap in order to study or to try and develop tests for consciousness in AI. Under the assumption that if we take the principles or the critical computations and functions each theory assigns to consciousness and we test whether those exist in specific AI systems, I should say the group differs in the level of confidence they have in the statement. So some people say, if we find all these indicators, and because they also think that computational functionalism is true, then the AI system is conscious. I am more agnostic about that. I think that our credences would be higher if I have a system that doesn't meet any of those indicators, as opposed to a system that meets 10 of those. I think that the chances of that system of being conscious is higher than the chances of the first system, and I think it is better to make judgments about this important question based on some theoretical work rather than just kind of our intuitions, which is what we see mostly in the literature. But if we had one theory of consciousness, we already had the answer to that question. And similarly, if we had a good enough theory of consciousness, then we wouldn't have had to take the natural kind approach, which Tim Bain and many of us try to develop in this TICS paper, and find consciousness in a non-theoretical driven manner. Because we already had a roadmap, we would have had a roadmap that would help us find the answer. So that could have been great, and this is why theory testing is important, and mainly because we don't have an agreement about theories of consciousness. So I wish we had one theory that would rule them all, but we don't. As a matter of fact, some people think that we have many, many theories of consciousness, so this is a famous, already I think famous a classification by Robert Kuhn. I think this is a bit misleading in the sense that this is basically, not everything here is a theory. I would say very few of these are theories, very few of these are neuroscientific theories, which is what we're interested in now, but under his count, there are over 200 accounts of consciousness. Under a more modest counting by Tim Bain and Anil Seth, we are talking about at least 22 theories, so we are still very far from converging upon one theory. And I want to thank Lucia and Axel, because I don't need to present this paper by now, it was discussed yesterday, but as Itai Yaron nicely showed, we are far from understanding not even which theory is correct, but what is the data that supports each one of the theories. And I just want to say, if we're already talking about this work, I just want to show you, in case you didn't get a chance to see this, where are you? Oh, here it is. So what Itai very nicely did is to create, I think I need to get out, okay, let's see, is to create, can I do this? For some reason, is to create the contrast database, which is basically, I'm showing this to you because I really hope that as many of you will use it. What you see here is a database that now has already more than 500 experiments. What you can do here, you can query the database yourself, see how many, which theories have been supported and to what extent. You can look at effects over time in your parameter of interest. So for example, which paradigm people have been using and so on and so forth. You can even look at the map and see which theory is supported. Oh, now it doesn't, oh, it does. Which theory is supported by which country. So you can really play with it as much as you want. And importantly, you can also upload your own paper. So if you have a paper in which you interpret your findings with respect to one of these theories, please upload it, because we want this database to be a source that is used by the community. I'll say that if you're interested in unconscious processing, we have another database for studies that compare conscious and unconscious processing, and specifically looks at unconscious processing and its scope. So I really welcome you all and hope that you will join it. And the field has been trying extensively in recent years to test theories of consciousness. So Lucia presented our own work about that, but this is only a part of a bigger network. We have 5 different adversarial collaborations that are taking place right now, and the hope is that within 5 years or so, we will have some interesting results from all of them, and hopefully very rich data sets by which the entire community could could test the theories and understand consciousness better. But, and it's a big but, what I've learned during this process is that theory testing, I don't want to say if it's more so in our field because I've never tried to test theories in other fields, but I can tell you that theory testing in our field is extremely complicated. I would bet that it might be as complicated in other fields of cognitive neuroscience as well, but you know, I don't want to say something that I haven't tested. And one of the reasons it's so complicated is that the theories are underspecified and in many ways are very hard to interpret and extract critical predictions from. And in this paper that Tobias mentioned before, this is based on the great debate in ASSC in Amsterdam. Basically, the proponents of 5 theories explained their position. By the way, it's also an opportunity to say this paper was mentioned by Tobias with respect to computational functionalism. This is Stan's view on this paper. It's not mine. I'm not an advocate of computational functionalism. But what I also like about this paper is that Stan is very candid there when he speaks about these theories and what they are at this point. And he says there, the entire debate would not have taken place had theories of consciousness been real theories in the full-fledged sense of the term, as none of the current theories has achieved a level of theoretical development enabling precise formulations leading to clear and explicit testable predictions that fully explain all aspects of consciousness. And I think that this is a very important point to bear in mind. So we are dealing with theories that are interesting, creative. Some of them have been also quite well supported empirically, but they are still in their kind of early stage of development. And they are, to us as a community, if we want to test them, we need to understand them better and we need to make them more specific. So how do we do that? I would argue here that science is not enough. So it's not enough to only rely on our training as scientists in order to do that. It's really good to work with philosophers. So Dave was one example for that, but I kind of, in this work with Alessandra Buccella and Uri Maoz, we tried to argue that in order for neuroscience and the understanding of issues like consciousness and free will, the scientific study of consciousness and free will, to really get going and show some breakthroughs, we need to work together and break kind of the theoretical boundaries and disciplinary boundaries, especially if you look at the growth of neuroscientific papers focused on consciousness, agency, and free will. So these are topics that, you know, a few tens of years ago were considered to be completely outside the realm of scientific investigation. You know, no respectable scientist or very few respectable scientists dared to work on free will or consciousness. But this has now changed, and it has been changing, and it is changing. But that also means that we as scientists, and now I'm, you know, despite the training in philosophy, I don't consider myself a philosopher. We as scientists, I don't think that we have been equipped with the right tools to understand some of the complexities that are involved in these concepts. So I think that really working together with philosophers is key here. And luckily enough, I had a philosopher in the lab, and so I'm very thankful for Niccolo to approach me in one of the ASCC meetings and say, you know, would you be interested in having a philosopher postdoc in your lab? And I literally jumped on the opportunity. What Niccolo has been doing together with Shai Fischer and Eden Elbaz and Maor Schreiber in the lab is to come up with an idea that I find extremely exciting, which is conceptual maps. And I will explain what that means, but the overall idea is that instead of, you know, understanding what these theories are from reading a bunch of review papers or opinion papers, we can try to translate those into maps of clear predictions where we understand the relations between them. And if you're interested, the paper is now under review, but it's also on Psych Archive or OSF. It's on OSF, so please feel free to download it and read it. We'll be happy to get your comments. So just to kind of show you where we are and what are the kind of boundaries of this project. So if you think about scientific progress, you can make progress in many different ways. One of them is data-driven. So this is in many ways the quest for the neural correlates of consciousness. Another is theory assessment. Also within the realm of theory assessment, you can do that in many ways. You can look at the parsimony of a theory, you can look at the plausibility of the theory and so on and so forth. But you could also look at its predictive power. So focus on predictions, and specifically within our assessment of predictions, in this project, we are not focusing on how novel the prediction is, how bold it is, or how precise it is. We want to understand how central it is. So we will develop tools to allow us to understand the centrality of each one of the predictions, because we think that that's a great recipe for experimentalists when they want to decide which prediction to test in an experiment. They might want to know how central this prediction is to the theory. So how do we do that? Basically, our philosophical framework is that of Lakatos, who kind of explained to us that scientific theories, it's not a matter of falsifying or confirming, and that's it. Because it's not just one principle by which the theory either fails or not. Instead, Lakatos explained that scientific theories are structured around a core of claims that the scientists are reluctant to discard. This is kind of the core of the theory, its main tenets. But then with auxiliaries around these core contents, we can create testable predictions. And then in some cases, there is an experiment that would contradict a specific prediction, and the scientist or the community would have to decide whether this is because the core is wrong or the auxiliary assumption is wrong. And in some cases, it would be completely rational for a scientist to hold on to the theory, although the prediction has failed. And I think that a very interesting test case from our field is what happened with the P300, right? So the P3, for many years, has been the signature marker of global neuronal workspace. That was the strongest proof that there is an ignition, and that's what happens when you become conscious of a specific stimulus. But then came people like Michael Pitts and showed that the P3 is actually not tied to perception itself, but to the task that people are doing and to the need to report. And that didn't make the global workspace people say, okay, we were wrong, time to kind of close the lab and go home. Instead, what they did was to say, okay, P3 is not the marker of the ignition. Something else should be the one, should be the evidence for that. May that be now, Claire Sargent with the bifurcation. It could be the metastability, the nonlinear response. There are different candidates for what are the signatures of the ignition. But the important lesson we take from this is that even if you refute one of the most central markers of a theory, that doesn't make the theory go away, and I think that rightfully so in this case. So if indeed GNW manages to show us that there is a different marker for the ignition, great. If not, then we have a problem. And so what we tried to do was to create these predictions maps. We focused on 4 theories of consciousness that are the ones who are most discussed in the literature, and that's also an important kind of disclaimer. We didn't focus on those 4 because they are the best ones or the most true ones and so on and so forth. We focus on them because they are most widely discussed, and we could find a lot of papers where the proponents of each one of the theories basically lay out their predictions. So the way this worked is that we met regularly. I don't know if it was once a week or once every 2 weeks, for a period of 2 years, something like that. And we really scrutinized over these papers, and what we did was to extract the predictions we found in all those papers, which was a pretty tedious process, but it wasn't the most complicated one. Because the most complicated one was to take these claims and now place them on the prediction maps. So first of all, we divided them to different types of claims. So there are substrate general claims. There are claims of extrapolation. For example, which other systems could be conscious. There are claims that are neural, where in the brain or what should happen in the brain when you're conscious as opposed to not, or when you're conscious of a specific content as opposed to not. And cognitive claims about, let's say, the function of consciousness. And then we created those maps where in the center of the map, we have the core claims that are specific, that are the specification of really the heart of the theory. And as you will see, we had to create different maps for theories that are more cognitively oriented as opposed to theories that are more substrate general oriented. The second layer was a layer of predictions that specify the core. They tell you what it means. For example, when you speak about integrated information, or what it means to have a global workspace, or what it means for a state to be of higher order, and so on and so forth. The third layer, here is where we have the divergence. If this is a cognitive theory, then the third layer was a cognitive prediction. Because for theories like GNW, for example, the neural implementation is a derivative of the cognitive assumption about what consciousness actually does. As opposed to theories that like recurrent processing or even integrated information theory that start with the neural implementation, or for IIT it's a bit more complex than that, and go from there to cognition, if at all. Then from the neural implementation, for the cognitive predictions, we move to neural implementations. For the substrate general claims, we go to neural predictions, and we end with the cognitive predictions here and the neural predictions there. And one key problem that some of you might already spot is that here come the five of us, have discussions and create the maps. Who tells us that these maps are an accurate representation of the theory? Maybe we are wrong. So we took some measures in order to scan, as much as we could, minimize the subjectivity of this process. First of all is, of course, the discussions between ourselves. We each one of us was, well, I wasn't responsible for anything, I just came. But each one of them was responsible for one theory, and then we started discussing them and had many arguments until we kind of reached the structure that we thought was correct. But after that, we went to each of the theory leaders. And we met with them, and they were kind enough, like Axel, to meet with us and tell us, look, this is where you got it wrong, this is how it should be phrased, this is how it should be structured. And for transparency, we also report the changes we've made in those maps, so it will be clear what happened following those discussions and what we thought independently of those discussions. But we thought it was really crucial because at the end of the day, because we don't have clear descriptions of each one of the theory, we need to ask the proponents in order to make sure that we are capturing them correctly. The result were maps that look a bit like the subway maps, I think, capturing the structure of each one of the theories. So this is GNW, and this is, well, I don't remember which one is which. This one is IIT, the second one, right? Because it's an outline. The third one, I mean. Yeah, like the green one is the IIT. So they kind of vary. So we have for all those four. And then when we presented this at ASSC, nicely enough, more people were interested. And then we created 5 more maps for all the theories that are participating in adversarial testing. So now for all of the theories that are now being tested adversarially, we have those prediction maps, which is pretty nice. I'll try to explain why. Also, one thing that we are working on now, and if anyone has ideas, please feel free to let us know. We want to see if we can create like a multi-dimensional map, so that we capture the similarities between the theories and also the distances between the theories, because for each one of those maps are only valid to what's happening within a theory. We cannot compare the centrality between theories, only within the network of predictions for that map. So that would, I think, be a very interesting exercise. Not simple, both conceptually and computationally with respect to creating it, but we are enjoying the challenge. So let me now zoom in on the GNW one, just to give you a flavor of how this looks. So at the center, we have the core. Consciousness is accounted for in functional terms, subjective availability of information to a global workspace of input and output systems that breaks modularity. And now we take this dense definition and we start to break it into the different components. So for example, B1, the global workspace operates as information bottleneck, entry is gated. B2, the workspace is needed to integrate between different modules and has the capacity to influence their activity. B3, attentional processes mobilize information and broadcast it into the workspace. And B4, the workspace enables maintenance of precepts over time. And from each one of those claims, we derive additional predictions, which kind of really try to embody the relations between the predictions and which one is derived from each other one, and so on and so forth. And we can kind of move in this map. You can see that here you have a bunch of neural predictions. Some of them, for example, obviously the frontoparietal one is being fed by several kind of more basic predictions, and some are more specific. Why is this, and it goes on. Why is this nice? Because, first of all, because it lets us understand the theory in a different way, I think. Everything is now kind of captured visually, which is, I think, for us as visual creatures, is nice. But also, it makes everything very specific. You know which theory, which prediction is derived from which other prediction, what are the relations between the predictions, and so on and so forth. But the additional advantage, and this is something that Ed and Elbaz suggested, is that now we can use graph theory measures in order to calculate the centrality of each one of those predictions and understand what is its value and what is its informativeness for the theory. So we focused on 4 different measures. One is the local reaching centrality, which is basically simply detect claims whose influence is broad. So for example, if you take a look at claim A, you can reach from claim A all the other claims in this map, meaning that it affects many other claims. And that's why it has a high LRC value. The second measure is harmonic centrality. So here we're not only asking which claim has broad implications, but also which can propagate quickly. So for example, if you look at claim A, it reaches E through B, so there is only one node you have to go through, while claim, and also through claim C. But if, for example, I would have taken this connection out, then A, and this one as well, let's say, then A had to go through a much longer path in order to get to E. So this one is looking for claims that are influential, but also they are not dependent on many other claims in order to get to the kind of final stage. Bitminen centrality is focused on detecting claims that serve as logical bridges. So basically, these are claims you can see here that are like at the center of many paths. So, you know, if you want to get from A to E, you have to go through it. If you want to get from A to D, you have to go through it. So that's it means that they are bridging between different claims. And perhaps the most interesting one is the page rank, because this one detects influential claims that are supported by other influential claims. So, for example, E is fed by B and C, and B and C in turn are fed by A. Meaning that if you, let's say, you refute E, it affects both B and C and A. If you refute D, it would only affect C and A. So that tells you how influential the claim is with respect to the prospects of, you know, refuting it. What would they mean with respect to the core claims of the theory? And then you can create these nice maps for each one of these measures to show which claims are more central to the theory than other claims. So let me show you how this looks for G and W, for example. So some of the central claims that we found. So obviously the claim about attention is very important because it connects the core to more downstream claims than any other claim, which is interesting. It's not ignition necessarily. Attention it's not surprising on the one hand. So the nice thing about the results of these analyses is that they all make sense. But if I had to bet which is the most, the claim that has most downstream claims, maybe I would think about something else. This is what we found. The frontoparietal claim, of course, is a crucial connector between key theoretical cognitive concepts of the theory and its neural predictions. this was a bit of a surprise for me, because the fact that unconscious processes are short-lived, or the claim, I didn't think that it has such a high falsification value on its own. Typically, when you test GNW, you don't really look at the duration of an unconscious process. Like, I'm trying to think about, from all the experiments that we looked that test GNW, how many of them focused on testing this specific prediction? Now, one of the reasons is that we kind of know that it's the case anyway, but still, I don't think anyone really thought about it as a test for this specific theory, but now we see that it actually is. Complexity measures and prolonged and deeper activations are also of high falsification value. So what I'm trying to kind of demonstrate, it's not about GNW, it's about what we can do for each one of those theories and how this can serve as a way of a roadmap or a recipe, choose your favorite metaphor, for testing theories. And as I said, now we have the predictions for all 9 theories, and this can be used, again, by experimenters and also by theoreticians. But let me show you what you can do with it. So one thing you can do is to use this in order to construct new tests based on what we've just seen. But another thing you can do is to take the existing evidence we already have and ask how meaningful they are for a specific theory, especially that we have all those adversarial collaborations now that we can look at. So each one with their own close affairs, so I focused on cogitate. And I found it interesting because Lucia mentioned the criticism that came up after cogitate. It was a criticism against IIT in the letter, but there was one sentence that referred to cogitate. And in that sentence, they wrote, the tests, meaning the adversarial collaboration tests, are problematic and not meaningful because they do not address the core claims of IIT. And I agree. We don't test the core claims of IIT, but we also don't test the core claims of GNW. Because in a way, when you think about the core claims of all the theories we have, and this is what the maps clearly show you, those are not really amenable for a scientific test. What does it mean to have a global workspace? What does it mean exactly to have a higher order state? I think recurrent processing is probably the one whose core is most implemented, with respect to is closest to being implemented, so it's easiest to test. But for all the other theories, we are not testing the core, we are testing the neural implementations. But now we can ask how central were our tests for the theory. So for example, for GNW, we tested several predictions. One is that decoding should generalize between task relevant and task irrelevant and should be found in prefrontal cortex. The other is there should be an onset response and an offset response. As Lucia told you yesterday, we didn't find that. We expected to find content-specific ignition in RSA. Again, in onset and offset, it's the same prediction. And we expected to find synchrony. Now we can go to the map and ask where are those predictions on the map. They are pretty peripheral, which is okay because this is the implementation. But when we look at the centrality of these measures, we can see that these are the ones who are highlighted in light blue. We can see that although the good thing is that they are still in the green realm, okay? We didn't focus on the very meaningless, maybe, or less central predictions, not meaningless, but less central predictions at the end. But I wouldn't say they are the most central predictions. What about IIT? This is where the criticism was raised. So for IIT, we tested the prediction that there should be sustained content-specific activation across tasks, and also for RSA, for content similarity, and we tested the prediction of synchrony, as Lucia explained yesterday. And when you look at the maps, these are the predictions. When you look at the centrality measures, you realize that actually it's the most central prediction to the theory. And that's, by the way, the prediction that failed. So the prediction about synchrony is the most, according to our analysis, it's the most central claim made by the theory. So I wish I could have shown that to the people who wrote the letter before they wrote the letter, to kind of demonstrate that sometimes, when we make it, what I like about this is that it's easy to say the predictions are central or not central. Now we can test, we can check. if they are central or not, or to what extent. Now, we also should be careful, and I want to be cautious about this. This is not like the Bible of the theory, in a way. And as I said before, maybe other people would structure the theory differently. This is why we wanted to get the approval of the theory leaders. But I think that to the very least, it's kind of like the discussion about consciousness in AI. Yes, you can say that Lambda is conscious, or that what did Liad Mudrik say? That LLMs are slightly conscious, and so on and so forth. Or you can try to get a more data-based, conceptual analysis-based judgment. And this is what we try to do there. And Eden not only came up with the idea for the graph theory measures, she also created a platform where, as you can see, we like platforms in the lab. So, and it's not just a matter of liking platforms, it's a matter of building on, like using the community as a tool to make progress. Like, we don't think that what we do should be done only by ourselves in our own lab. We want everyone to try and engage in this exercise together. So let me show you her platform and how it works. I'll put it here. I'm not sure if I have it open yet. So hopefully everything will work well. So this is the platform that she created. This is recurrent processing. This is GNW. You get the claims. You can start playing with it yourself and create your own map. You can add color to it if you want. You can add color, but I'm not doing it well now. Okay, you can add color. You can add connecting lines and so on and so forth. Okay, like that. That's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is load the maps that we created, here for example. And then this is our map, just looks a bit differently with the color. And then you can analyze. You can say, okay, I want to see what is the harmonic centrality, and then you get all the measures. So you can do it on your own. And if you want, you could also start creating your own map. So choose the theory you're interested in, start putting up the claims, start organizing them, and you can calculate all those measures yourself. So if you have a different version, let's say, of GNW, I'm happy to see what you come up with, and so on and so forth. And if you want to, and we actually hope that many other fields will also start using this, because we think that this could be really a valuable tool to the field of consciousness. Now you may ask, okay, how is that related to Dave? This is what we came here for, right? And I warned you in advance that I'm going to focus only on the introduction, because I'm here to talk about theory testing, and the hard problem is probably the most relevant discussion there. And one question that I kind of wanted to ask, and I warn you in advance that these are very uncooked thoughts, and I would be happy to hear what you think after I present them. So Dave writes in the introduction, he presents the hard problems. Why is all this processing accompanied by an experience in our life? And in the 1995 paper, he writes, why is the performance of these functions accompanied by experience? Why doesn't all this information processing go in the dark, free of any inner field? So we can ask, do any of these theories that we are trying to test, do they answer the hard problem, and can they answer the hard problem? So I tried to come up with a translation of the hard problem to neuroscientific theory language, and I've seen that also in other people's texts, they typically word it like that: why some brain states are accompanied by a conscious experience and others are not. I don't know if you think it's a good formulation of the hard problem. Let's see. But it's the one that can at least connect us with the neuroscience of it. And on the face of it, like prima facie, many of the theories have an answer. So you ask, for example, higher order thought theories, why some brain states are accompanied by a conscious experience, they would say, because there is a higher order state that points at them. Or recurrent processing, why? Because there is recurrent processing. GNW, why? Because the information entered the global workspace. But none of us are satisfied, right? It's clear to us that this is not an answer to the hard problem. Why? Because of the why. So it's really a matter of how you understand, I think, or at least for me, how you understand the word why. Because I don't think the question is what is the difference between a conscious and an unconscious state, or how specific brain state becomes conscious. I think the main question is, why is it that the global workspace is the mechanism that gives rise to phenomenal experiences and not any other mechanism? And especially if we can imagine another world whereby people with global workspaces are not conscious, right? The one theory that at least declares itself as trying to do so is IIT. I see that some people are cheering for the theory. And I think the reason that people think that at least it tries to answer the hard problem is because it starts with phenomenology, right? It starts with the axioms, and it tries to give us a principled answer to the question, what should the brain or any other mechanism be built like in order to support consciousness? And specifically, why in the deeper sense of the word. But the problem, as we've seen, is that for many people in the field, this decision to start with phenomenology renders the theory unscientific. So it seems, and they specifically say it in the paper, they say, to the extent that IIT's metaphysical commitments remain promoted as key features, this stronger version of IIT, which is our target here, is incompatible with standard approaches in cognitive neuroscience for testing ideas empirically. And they specifically refer to the fact that it starts with axioms, with phenomenological axioms. Now, I'm not married to any one of those theories, and as you've seen before, I have criticism about all of them. But I do think that it's an interesting observation, at least I thought it was interesting, I hope you will agree, that it seems as if we have two different options. One option is that scientific theories should not or cannot solve the hard problem, because if they start with a functional stand, in a way, they won't give us the answer to the why in the most meaningful sense of the word that we are interested in. The other option is that we should change our definition of what is scientific and what is not. Like, what is a legitimate move in the field of science when we try to answer these questions? And I think that many people would feel kind of uncomfortable with both of these options, in a way. And I was wondering, and I don't know what Dave would think, if this changing the definition of scientific, of what is referred to as scientific, is in a way corresponding with what he presented here, the mapping problem, where it tries to find the mapping between physical states and phenomenal states. And the reason I thought this might be the case is because the fundamental psychophysical principle. So it seems as if a typical scientific principle won't do the job here. We need something that goes deeper than that. And I don't know if that means being more brave or more adventurous or what have you. But it's either we say, look, we don't want to work on the hard problem because it requires too much of us as scientists. Or we say we do want to work on that problem, but then we accept the fact that we have to approach things differently. We can't do science as usual. And to be honest, I don't even know where I stand with this question. I think that each one of them has a price that I'm not sure, it's a question. But I think to the very least, and I am very curious to hear if you agree with this kind of very crude, broad classification. I think that while kind of thinking about it, I realized that there is some conundrum here for us as scientists. So I said, okay, hard problem, gone. What about the easy problems? Did we solve those? So the ability to, and it was interesting because these are the problems that Dave set for us as the field of consciousness science that are easy and that should be solved. Now we are 31 years later. The ability to discriminate, categorize, and react to environmental stimuli, I would say that this has become a more general question, not really in the science of consciousness per se. We don't really know yet how we know a bunch of stuff, but I wouldn't say that we solved it completely. The integration of information by a cognitive system, again, I wouldn't say there is a consensus about that. The reportability of mental states, I think we study a lot the mechanisms of report, but if you ask me, can you explain to me how a mental state is translated into a report? I don't really know to give you the full answer. I can give you different hypotheses, but it's not as if I have the answer. The ability of a system to access its own internal state, the focus of attention. So here there is so many controversies about what attention does or doesn't do, the deliberate control of behavior. I thought maybe the difference between wakefulness and sleep, we're kind of, no, maybe not yet as well, I don't know. So all in all, the problem is a bit, the situation seems a bit problematic, and some might even say that the field is doomed and stuff like that. Well, I'm an optimist. I don't think that the field is doomed, and I don't think that the fact that we haven't been able to solve the problems yet means we won't be able to solve them in the future. I think we have to be equipped with the right equipment. And I don't know if you've noticed, but young Macaulay Culkin has a consciousness meter in his pocket. If you remember Dave's consciousness meter from his talk at ASCC. So what should we do? I think we should follow Dave's words. So he wrote in the book, I am an optimist about consciousness. I think that we will eventually have a theory of it. And in this book, I look for one. But consciousness is not just business as usual. If we are to make progress, the first thing we must do is face up to the things that make the problem so difficult. Then we can move forward toward a theory without blinkers and with a good idea of the task at hand. So Dave explained in the book the conceptual issues with consciousness. I want to kind of give you my own version of what are the current problems that I think we should solve in order to move forward. Now, of course, it's heavily biased by what I do, because the problems that I see as critical are the ones that I'm most interested in. So I apologize that many of the things are things that are, or maybe all of them. So one is, I think that we need clear definitions about what we mean by consciousness. And I completely understand that this is a minefield. So together with Michael Pitts and Nathan Fevre and Aaron Schurger, we tried to explain what we mean by consciousness in a recent paper that evoked also criticism. So soon there will be, some commentaries by Lucia and Tobias and Axel and Chris, who are here, and Ian Phillips, because they don't think that what we think is the meaning of consciousness is correct, and we use that also as an opportunity to explain what we weren't able to explain in this paper. I think the critical question, and I hope that we will discuss it in the panel later on, is how do we reach an agreement? I don't think it makes sense that we keep studying something we cannot agree on what it is. And I don't have the mechanism. I think we need to think about what is the best way to move forward, because otherwise we might be going in circles. In this paper, we try to argue that if you accept our definition, some problems will be solved. You don't have to. I'm just trying to persuade you. Another thing is to understand what we mean by unconscious processing. So as someone who's been working on this problem for 20 years now, I can tell you that people just, again, mean different things and use different methods in order to study those processes. So in a project, in a multi-author project who was led by François Stockart and Maor Schreiber, with Nathan Fevre and many other authors, you can see some of them here on Zoom, we try to converge on what we mean by studying unconscious processing in the lab. And I think that it's important to try to establish these types of consensus. Now, again here, and I forgot to mention Zefan was also here, who's on this project as well. What I learned about this process, by the way, I was hoping, to be honest, when we started, that at the end of the day, I will have a perfect recipe. So I can tell my students, this is how we do it. We weren't able to get that recipe. There were many questions that were still left open, but it also shows us exactly what needs to be studied so we know how to do it right. Improving the theories, this is what we try to do with these maps. I think we should question our practices, our assumptions, and our conventions. And so the paper that work by Itai that was mentioned before, I think that this is a startling finding, but what is even more startling was that when Itai tried to predict which theory is about to be supported without knowing anything about the results, just based on the methodological choices of the researchers and the way the experiment was built, he was able to do so with 80% accuracy, knowing nothing about the results of the experiment. That shows us that we have been studying this in a somewhat biased way. So we need to keep doubting ourselves as much as we can. Here are the results. And I think that we should break the theoretical and disciplinary silos. So I think these adversarial collaborations where two camps that didn't really interact before started speaking. It's a very complicated, very complex animation to make that point. Started talking with one another, then things start to change. And when people collaborate from different disciplines, I think that's the way to move forward. And finally, I think we should dare to make bold claims, and I think that Dave and the book is an excellent example, because and like Lucia said at the beginning of this meeting, a PhD student who just dares to come and say, look, there are easy problems, there are hard problems, you are thinking about the entire thing incorrectly, and advocate for dualism in an era where this was, I would say, you probably agree with me, pretty not mainstream. I think that boldness is very important, and curiosity and chasing new questions, but I think it's also important to remember the old ones. So I don't want us to chase trends in the field. So I was very excited when we started to work on the distribution of consciousness in the Brain, Mind, and Consciousness program, because developing tests for consciousness was a new and exciting question for me, and I was very happy to see Lucia's, your interpretation or your take on this as well in this talk. But that doesn't mean that we should forgo all the old questions, because we haven't solved them yet. And I think it's important because we shouldn't leave any kind of stone unturned, but also because the child in us wants to know the answer. Like, I didn't think about conscious and unconscious processing when I was 3, but it was the main question of my PhD, and I haven't solved it yet. So I think it's important to come back to these questions and not give up, and also because the 80s were pretty nice, despite, again, some questionable, clothes decisions of the time. But I think that this is how we can make progress, not with those clothes. Basically, try to find the right balance between new and old, between foundational work that sometimes may seem not exciting. It would be maybe nicer to conduct an experiment with new technologies and so on and so forth. But sometimes, just sitting with the theories, for example, and extracting the claims, and seeing how they are related to one another, I think could do more for the field at large than a specific, very exciting finding that we will find. So I just want to end by thanking my lab, of course, and really I cannot be more fortunate than to be working with those people, and the Digitate Consortium, and the Brain, Mind, and Consciousness program, and of course you for listening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.